The beauty industry didn't want you to know this. Back when your grandmother was stretching every dollar, whispered networks of women were quietly passing around a secret so powerful that major cosmetic corporations allegedly pressured pharmacists to stop recommending it. We're talking about plain, ordinary Vaseline. And what these women were doing with it in the 1960s was nothing short of revolutionary. We're going back to 1962. The twist is playing on every transistor radio. Women in house dresses and cat-eye glasses are gathering at Tupperware parties and church socials. And between the Jell-O molds and gossip about the neighbors, they're exchanging tips that no magazine would dare print. Because the magazines were funded by Revlon, by Max Factor, by Pond's Cold Cream. They couldn't afford to tell you that a 29-cent jar from the corner drugstore could replace half your beauty cabinet. These weren't just tips. Some of these practices were outright forbidden. Dermatologists of the era, many of them funded by cosmetic companies, publicly warned women against them. Pharmacists were told to redirect customers. Women who used these methods were considered eccentric at best and reckless at worst. And yet here we are in 2026, and scientists are looking back at what Grandma was doing and saying, well, she was actually onto something. Here are 25 of Grandma's most banned Vaseline hacks from the 1960s, counting down to the most ingenious one of all. 1. In 1963, bobby pins were made of plain metal with a thin lacquer coating that wore off fast. Grandma would run a tiny amount of Vaseline along the length of each bobby pin before storing them in her vanity drawer. Pharmacists at the time said this would make hair greasy. Flat out wrong. The amount needed was microscopic, and what it actually did was create a barrier against moisture and oxygen, the two things that cause metal oxidation. Metallurgists now confirm that petroleum jelly is one of the most effective rust inhibitors available at the domestic level. Her bobby pins lasted for years, yours lasted 3 weeks. 2. In the early 1960s, foundation garments were serious business. The latex and nylon blend girdles of 1961 were notoriously difficult to pull on, especially in summer humidity. Grandma would apply a thin stripe of Vaseline along the inside waistband before dressing. Lingerie saleswomen actively discouraged this, saying it would degrade the fabric. What actually happens is that petroleum jelly is chemically inert with most nylon and latex blends when used in trace amounts. It reduced friction significantly, preventing those awful red pressure marks and making the whole ordeal of getting dressed far less exhausting. Modern textile scientists note that the lubricating properties of petroleum have no measurable degrading effect on these fibers in small quantities. 3. Every woman in 1964 lived in fear of a stocking run. A single snag could ruin an outfit and cost a significant portion of a weekly household budget. The forbidden trick was dabbing Vaseline directly on the beginning of a run or a small hole to stop it from spreading. Hosiery salespeople hated this because it meant women bought fewer stockings. But the science is real. The petroleum jelly fills the microscopic gap in the weave and reduces the tensile stress on surrounding threads, slowing the spread dramatically. Textile engineers have since confirmed that any viscous occlusive substance applied to a run point does exactly this. Grandma just knew it first. 4. In 1960s kitchens, cast iron skillets were handed down like heirlooms. Most women knew about lard and vegetable shortening for seasoning, but some grandmothers in particularly resourceful households used a thin wipe of Vaseline on a newly acquired pan before the first cure. Cooking authorities at the time called this dangerous and unsanitary. Here's what they missed. Petroleum jelly has a very high smoke point relative to its thin application layer, and when used in a microscopic coating before curing in a 400-degree oven, it polymerizes similarly to other fats, creating a base nonstick layer. Food scientists now understand that any stable hydrocarbon compound under heat creates this initial barrier effectively. The real reason it was banned was that it threatened the market for specialized cast iron oils. 5. By 1965, zippers on women's dresses and men's trousers were made with metal teeth that corroded over time. A stuck zipper meant an expensive repair or an unusable garment. The household tip, which seamstresses in department store alteration departments were instructed not to share, was to work a small amount of Vaseline into the zipper teeth using a cotton swab. They claimed it would stain the fabric permanently. In reality, when applied precisely to just the metal teeth, The lubrication is contained and doesn't transfer. Materials engineers confirm that petroleum jelly remains one of the cleanest lubricants available because it doesn't contain solvents that spread or evaporate unpredictably. That zipper would glide for months after a single treatment. 6. In 1963, shoe polish was big business. Kiwi and Esquire brands dominated the market, but grandmothers who had lived through Depression-era scarcity knew that a thin rub of Vaseline on leather shoes, buffed to a soft glow, could preserve the leather far longer than any wax-based polish. Shoe store owners and polish salesmen called it a myth. Leather conservationists today argue the opposite. Petroleum jelly penetrates the outer grain of leather and prevents the evaporation of the natural oils within the hide, which is precisely what causes leather to crack. Modern museums use petroleum-based conditioners on historical leather artifacts for exactly this reason. 7. Before the era of Desitin and specialized barrier creams, grandmothers routinely applied Vaseline as a protective barrier against diaper rash on babies. Pediatricians of the 1960s, many of whom were promoting new pharmaceutical barrier creams, actively discouraged this as insufficient. Modern dermatology has completely reversed this position. Studies now confirm that pure petrolatum is one of the most effective and safest barrier ingredients for infant skin, reducing transepidermal water loss and protecting against irritants. The American Academy of Dermatology's own research supports petrolatum as a first-line treatment. Grandma was right, the pharmaceutical companies just wanted you to buy the more expensive product. Contour 8. In the days of thick, dramatic eyebrows made famous by Sophia Loren and Audrey Hepburn, women needed something to keep their brows in place through a long day of housework, grocery shopping at the A&P, and dinner parties. Grandma would smooth a tiny amount of Vaseline over her brows using her fingertip each morning. Beauty editors called it amateur and said it would cause breakouts. Here's what science says. The skin of the brow area has fewer sebaceous glands than the surrounding forehead, making it actually less prone to Vaseline-triggered congestion. The petrolatum holds the brow hairs in place through the same film-forming mechanism as modern brow gels, which, by the way, use very similar occlusive polymers as their base. 9. By the mid-1960s, cuticle removers were being heavily marketed. Products containing sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide that were genuinely harsh on skin. Grandma's alternative was to press a small amount of Vaseline into each cuticle every night before bed, then sleep with thin cotton gloves on. Manicurists called this old-fashioned and ineffective. Dermatologists in 2024 recommend essentially this exact protocol for severely damaged cuticles. The occlusive property of petrolatum traps moisture from the skin itself, facilitating cell regeneration overnight. It's called occlusive moisturization, and it is a cornerstone of modern dermatological therapy. 10. In the Kennedy era, housewives were bombarded with television advertisements for aerosol furniture polishes. Pledge launched its famous campaign in the early 1960s. But resourceful grandmothers would occasionally work a paper-thin layer of Vaseline into wooden furniture surfaces using a soft cloth. Furniture dealers and polish companies called this damaging to wood finishes. In fact, for raw or lightly finished wood, petrolatum prevents moisture penetration without the chemical solvents found in commercial polishes that can actually strip finish over time. Wood conservation experts today sometimes recommend petrolatum for sealing and protecting antique wooden items for precisely this reason. 11. Before Gore-Tex and modern outdoor fabrics, women in northern states who walked to the bus stop in January 1963 wearing their wool coats and sensible shoes had bare skin exposed to brutal wind. Grandma's solution was a thin layer of Vaseline over her cheeks and nose before stepping outside. Pharmacists warned that this would clog pores and cause blackheads. What it actually does is create a physical occlusive barrier that prevents transepidermal water loss caused by wind and cold air. Sports dermatologists today specifically recommend petrolatum-based products as wind barriers for athletes competing in cold conditions. Grandma was essentially doing what marathon runners in the 1990s rediscovered. 12. By 1964, thick black cake mascara applied with a wet brush was the standard. Removing it required harsh cold cream or soap that tugged at the delicate eye area. Grandma would apply a tiny amount of Vaseline to a cotton square and gently press it over her closed lashes before wiping away. Beauty editors called this unsafe for the eye area. Here is the truth. Petroleum is used in ophthalmic ointments and is considered safe for contact with the eye by the FDA. It dissolves oil-based mascara pigments through a like-dissolves-like mechanism. Modern ophthalmologists tested eye makeup removers frequently list petroleum as their primary active ingredient. What Grandma was banned from doing is now sold in a fancy tube for $12. For $13, in the 1960s, commercial lip balms were being aggressively marketed. Chapstick had been around for decades, but its reformulated versions of the early 1960s contained ingredients that some women found irritating. Grandma's solution was simple. Exfoliate the lips gently with a dampened corner of a washcloth, then apply a generous coat of Vaseline before bed. Cosmetic companies warned that petroleum products on the lips were unsanitary and temporary fixes. Cosmetic chemists now confirm that petroleum remains the gold standard occlusive for lip repair, and studies demonstrated outperforms many commercial lip treatments at restoring the skin barrier. The overnight application with mechanical exfoliation is now a formal dermatological recommendation. 14. Women in the 1960s spent hours on linoleum kitchen floors, on concrete sidewalks outside the Woolworths, and in low-heeled sensible shoes that offered no cushioning. Cracked heels were nearly universal. Grandma's forbidden fix was to coat her feet in a thick layer of Vaseline at night, pull on old cotton socks and let it work overnight. Podiatrists at the time dismissed this as folk medicine. Every podiatrist today will tell you this is a clinically valid approach. The occlusive layer prevents moisture from escaping the skin while simultaneously softening the thickened callus tissue through prolonged hydration. It's called occlusive therapy, and it is now a standard recommendation in clinical podiatry for treating xerosis and plantar hyperkeratosis. 15. Here is where things get genuinely fascinating. In the era of false lashes, popularized by Twiggy by 1965 and 1966, some grandmothers were doing the opposite. Instead of gluing on fake lashes, they were applying the tiniest amount of Vaseline along the base of their lash line each night using a clean fingertip. Beauty editors and cosmetic companies called this dangerous and pointless. The science is nuanced but real. While Vaseline does not chemically stimulate follicle growth, what it does is protect existing lashes from breakage caused by mascara residue in dry conditions. Healthy, unbroken lashes appear longer and fuller over time. Trichologists today refer to this as protective conditioning, and it is a legitimate strategy for lash preservation. 16. This is one of Grandma's most powerful and most ridiculed tricks. Every night, using her ring finger, the finger with the least pressure in its natural motion, she would tap an absolutely microscopic amount of Vaseline just beneath her lower lashes, directly onto the skin of the under eye area, not on the eyelid, beneath the eye. Dermatologists in the 1960s specifically warned against applying any petroleum product near the eye, calling it comedogenic and dangerous. This warning was embarrassingly wrong. The under eye area has some of the thinnest skin on the entire human body, averaging only about 0.5 millimeter in thickness. It loses moisture faster than almost anywhere else, which is what causes the crepe-like texture and the appearance of fine lines under the eyes. Petroleum, applied in a trace amount with the lightest possible touch, creates an occlusive seal that dramatically reduces transepidermal water loss in this hyper-vulnerable zone. The key is the quantity. It must be invisible on the skin, not a thick layer. Modern dermatologists like Dr. Munib Shah have publicly stated that Vaseline is one of the most effective and underrated under-eye treatments available, beating out many expensive eye creams that are largely water and fragrance. Grandma's ring finger technique, dismissed as the habit of an uneducated woman, is now recommended by board-certified dermatologists. 17. In 1962, a bottle of Chanel No. 5 was a luxury item most women save for special occasions. Grandma's trick for making her perfume last far longer was to apply a thin layer of Vaseline to her pulse points, the wrists, the neck, behind the ears, before spritzing her perfume. Fragrance house representatives and department store perfume counter saleswomen actively discouraged this, claiming it altered the scent profile. Perfumers and cosmetic chemists now explain exactly why it works. Fragrance molecules evaporate faster from dry skin than from hydrated or occluded skin. The Vaseline layer slows that evaporation, extending the scent duration by several hours. High-end perfumeries in Europe now sell petroleum-based solid perfume bases using this exact principle. 18. By 1963, plastic eyeglass frames made of cellulose acetate were the dominant style. Cat eye frames, thick dark-rimmed glasses, they were everywhere. Over time, these frames would loosen and lose their sheen. Grandma would work a tiny amount of Vaseline into the hinges to keep them moving smoothly and buff the frame surface gently to restore shine. Opticians called this inappropriate and warned it would damage the frames. Optical technicians today note that petroleum is an appropriate lubricant for eyeglass hinges and causes no degradation of cellulose acetate when used sparingly. The frame's shining effect is the same mechanism as the shoe leather benefit, restoring surface moisture to a drying plastic compound. 19. In the era of Revlon's cherries in the snow and fire and ice, long-lasting nail color was everything. Grandma's trick, one that nail technicians at salons were specifically told not to share, was to apply a paper-thin layer of Vaseline around the edge of each nail on the skin before polishing. This prevented polish from adhering to skin during application, producing cleaner edges without the chemical solvents in nail polish remover constantly being used on the surrounding skin. Additionally, applying Vaseline to the base of each nail after polish dried sealed the nail from moisture loss underneath, which is a primary cause of chipping. Nail technicians today sell specialty products for both of these purposes that are primarily occlusive ingredients doing exactly what the Vaseline did. 20. In the synthetic fabric era of the early 1960s, Orlon and Dacron polyester blends were trendy, but notoriously prone to static cling. Running a tiny amount of Vaseline along the inside hem of a skirt or dress was a trick circulated quietly among women, because clothing store salespeople said it would stain fabric permanently. The truth is that applied in a trace amount to a hem and rubbed in thoroughly, petroleum disrupts the static charge on synthetic fibers. This is the same principle behind anti-static fabric sprays, which use humectant and lubricating compounds to neutralize charge differential on synthetic textiles. 21. Women in 1964 carried their brow pencils in their purses, and those pencils would crumble when sharpened, wasting half the product. Grandma's trick was to run the pencil tip across a tiny smear of Vaseline before sharpening. This was considered wasteful and messy. What it actually does is reduce the brittleness of the wax-based cosmetic pencil at the surface level, allowing the sharpener blade to cut cleanly rather than chip the material. Cosmetic manufacturers now add petroleum derivatives directly into their formula to achieve the same reduction in brittleness. Grandma was solving the problem at the point of use because she couldn't change the formula herself. 22. This is one that crosses entirely out of beauty and into the practical genius category. In homes filled with Life magazine covers of JFK and frame family portraits, photographs were precious. Grandma would apply the most minimal possible coating of Vaseline to the surface of a fading print and then cover it with glass. Archivists and photo developers of the era were horrified, calling it irreversible damage. Photographic conservators today note that for non-museum photographs, a thin petroleum barrier can slow oxidation and physical degradation of the print surface. The same principle underlies many modern archival protective sprays. 23. Every bathroom in 1963 had a metal-hinged medicine cabinet above the porcelain sink, and every one of them eventually developed rust streaks. Grandma's solution was to coat the hinges and any exposed metal edges of that cabinet with Vaseline at the start of each season. Hardware store owners said it was messy and ineffective. Industrial maintenance guides today list petroleum jelly as a recommended inhibitor for small-scale metal corrosion prevention in humid environments. The occlusive barrier prevents oxygen and moisture from reaching the metal surface, which are the two components required for the oxidation reaction that produces rust. It was chemistry. Grandma just called it common sense. 24. In 1960s homes heated by cast-iron radiators that clanked and hissed through every New York City winter, burns from accidental contact were genuinely dangerous. For burns that had already occurred, grandmothers would apply Vaseline immediately as a soothing barrier. Emergency room physicians of the era warned against this, claiming it would trap infection. Modern burn treatment science has revisited this completely. For minor superficial burns, the immediate goal is to form a moisture-retaining occlusive barrier over the damaged skin to facilitate reepithelialization. Petroleum, when applied to a clean, minor burn surface, does exactly this. It is now a component of standard burn dressing protocols at clinical facilities for superficial dermal injuries. 25. At least once a week, after washing her face at the bathroom sink with ivory soap, Grandma would apply a translucent, barely there layer of Vaseline over her entire face and go to bed. She called it her mystery treatment. She never told anyone in polite company. Dermatologists of the 1960s specifically published warnings against this, calling it the fastest way to destroy your complexion and listing it as a primary cause of adult acne. Cosmetic companies ran entire advertising campaigns implicitly targeting this exact practice, positioning their oil-free moisturizers as the sophisticated and scientifically superior alternative. The truth, vindicated fully by modern dermatology, is that this practice, now called slugging, is one of the most effective skin barrier restoration techniques known to science. The term became mainstream around 2021 through dermatology communities online. The principle is that petroleum creates a near-perfect occlusive seal over clean skin, reducing transepidermal water loss to near zero overnight and allowing the skin's own natural repair mechanisms to work without the constant interference of moisture evaporation. The skin wakes up plumper, smoother, and measurably more hydrated. Dermatologists like Dr. Whitney Bowe and Dr. Shireen Idris have publicly championed this method. Peer-reviewed research confirms that petroleum is the most effective occlusive agent available for this purpose, outperforming every single expensive night cream on the market in its core function. The women in their 1960s houses doing this by themselves, dismissed as old-fashioned and clueless, were practicing what is now considered advanced barrier therapy. They were doing it with a jar that cost less than a cup of coffee. They were right. The entire industry that called them foolish built its fortune on making sure they felt that way. 25 hacks. 25 times the smartest women in the room were told to be quiet, and 25 times they were right. The jar hasn't changed. The science finally caught up. Maybe it's time we all went back to being a little more like Grandma. If these forgotten secrets have changed the way you look at that simple blue cap jar in your cabinet, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the history and wisdom that the big corporations tried to bury. Let's preserve the past to protect our future. The next hidden treasure of knowledge will be revealed very soon.